Oh my god, Homeland just got 10 times better than it already was. Like, seriously, this episode was amazing. I loved it. It was just amazing. Hey guys, it's Kevin again. This is Mary for Homeland Season 4, Episode 6, From A to B and Back Again. And guys, this episode was just, oh my god, it was amazing. I loved it. There were so many things I loved about this episode. First of all, one of the things this episode did amazingly, that I personally loved, was that this episode had basically the balls to kill off a major character. It was by far the best episode of the season, as I said, and there's so many things this episode did so well. I was so into this episode the entire time. There's not one thing I thought was bad in this episode. I was so into it, and I loved it, and let's just get to it, because I loved it so, so much, and the acting was fantastic, and just everything about it was so, so good, definitely, and shit is definitely about to go down, especially for Carrie. Like, Carrie definitely, there's any time for her to go too far, she's definitely officially gone too far. And I think she knows that now. And I think she's not gonna be able to really get herself out of it now. It's really sad. But let's just get to it. So we see Carrie, she's sitting in bed with a half-dressed Aayan, and he's working on his cover ID with him. She's working on his cover ID with him. He kisses her, and she tells him to focus on learning the Dozoyer. She's still, basically playing him. She's still making it seem like she likes him when she really doesn't. It's still disgusting, but, that's Carrie for you. So she runs through a series of identifying questions and then why he's studying in England instead of Pakistan. And he has very good answers, Baral, and then pulls her back into the bed to cuddle with him. And, kind of his answer is that one, she's pretending to be from London, so that's one of them. You know, basically he indulges him for a moment and then shows him an envelope. And he opens the envelope and he sees a pile of money, £1,000. There's also a passport in his name, and she tells him they're gonna leave tonight, and says every day is a chance for him to be caught. Basically, that's her plan, is for them to leave. And she says she has some things to do, and he says he has to pick up some things from his dorm room. She wants him to leave the stuff, but he says it's all he has. She makes him promise not to take any unnecessary risks, and he agrees. She dresses and heads out. So she goes to the station and finds Quinn, and she says she needs a small discreet team. He houses her about how he's not really happy with her, basically having sex with Ian. He's still not happy with her about that, and everyone in this episode's referencing him as the kid except for Carrie, which really he is. Ian's a young kid here. He's a college student. He's not really some like 30-year-old. He is a college student. So yes, I would call him a kid because he's still in school. So basically, she says she needs she says his surveillance op crashed and burned because she was in bed, and he scoffs and calls her the boss, and she says she'll find someone willing to do their job, and she sees Redmond and pulls him to talk. So Ian's in his dorm room looking through photos of his family, obviously very sad because his entire family died. I know, like, I keep saying that, but it's still really sad. He looks at his mother and is very sad about that. He puts these into his bag, and by the way, guys, this was by whoever plays Ian, this was by far his best performance. Like, out of every episode he's done so far, this was by far his best one. So Kieran shows up and asks what he's doing, and he says he's leaving for London. And it's really sad because, of course, Kieran is his girlfriend. She asks if he's going for good. She asks how he can do this and says he has a friend who is a journalist. He has a friend who is a journalist. He doesn't mention that, he's actually having sex with her. And he says she can't tell anyone. She asks if he was going to go without a goodbye. He says it's not fair. He asks her what he's supposed, she asks her what he's supposed to do now, and he tells her that he has to leave because of her father, and she says he has to go, and he makes up that lie that he's going because of that, and she asks him to take her along, and he says he can't, and it's really sad because of course they were together, and she steps closer and he gets angry and tells her no. He says he has to go alone. She acts jealous. He says the journalist saved him, and asks when he met her and how. She asks if he loves the woman, and I mean, it's so sad because of course I predicted that this was going to happen. He's basically screwing himself over because he has no idea that Carrie doesn't give two shits about him. He doesn't even realize it. It's so sad to witness because he's basically destroying his life and he doesn't even realize it. So he says how she arranged for him to go to college in London, and then she asks him again. He says he's only known her for a short while. He tells Kieran he has to go and says goodbye. He steps out into the hall of his dorm. He's very upset, but keeps going. He sees this man waiting outside the dorms for him and heads back inside, then goes into this stairwell and heads out the emergency exit. So definitely this was really intense. There's this guy notices him, but at least he has a head start now, so it's really intense here. Um, the guy basically witnesses him. He pulls up his head and takes off running into the crowd of students, and he ducks into a building and hides behind a wall, and his pursuer walks on by, and he sighs in relief, and Boyd is there and says he has a gift for Redman. So definitely, this is really intense scene. I thought that scene was amazingly well done and definitely really intense. So Boyd is there and says he has a gift for Redman. They get Quinn to help him, and he tells him that Redman bailed him out the other night. And Boyd says they talked about bail busting woman. He hands Boyd a pen and paper, and he asks Quinn if she's a crazy ass bail breaker, like he's heard. And Quinn just stares at him, and then Hingsley comes in and calls Quinn out, and he goes and the guy tells him Ghazi didn't get off the plane in South Africa. He tells the guy to get in touch with Saul as soon as he touches down in D.C. What they don't realize, of course, that Haqquini and his guys captured Saul. They don't realize that. Saul's barely in this episode. He's in the episode in one very important scene, which we will talk about, but Saul's barely in this episode, which I actually thought was very well done, because we, the audience, are like, oh my god, where's Saul? Because, Saul's such an essential part of this show, obviously. You gotta have Saul. I mean, you have to. So Boyd leaves and tells Quinn goodbye on the way out. Carrie walks down the street and lets herself into her safe house, and the guy from the campus is watching from across the street. And inside, Aayan tells her that he was chased down, but says he lost the guy. She says if it was ISI, there will be no limits on what can happen to him. She tells him she's not at risk as a foreigner, but he is, because she's basically trying to be a foreigner, so she's not at risk, but he is. And she says they have to push back their departure until things cool off. And he tells her also about Kieran, and that he told her he was leaving. She says, oh, your friend, and he says, oh, she was more than a friend. She asks if he said where they were going, and he did, and says they need to leave now. And she says she can find out ahead of time if he's on the watch list. She says if he is, there's no safe way to get him out of there. He says he knows, and then says his uncle can help. He says his uncle can get him across the border through Afghanistan and then to England. She asks if he would do that. He says Haqquini paid for his college and would help him. And he holds out his hand for his passport, and she hands it over. He asks if she's angry, and she says it's her fault by letting her guard down. They see a shadow at the door, and that guy breaks into the window. It's really intense here because basically he just told her about this, and that same guy that was chasing breaks out into the window. She tells him to go, and someone breaks in through the bedroom. She drags the guy off Aayan. He runs for the roof. He scrambles across it and then down another roof to the street, hits the ground running like a rabbit, comes out of an alley, looks around, sees no one. He hears tires squealing, goes to high as a van pulls up, and he sees Carrie being shoved into the van. She's kidnapped, peels out past him in the van, and Carrie asks if they had to make it so rough. They bloody her nose, and she tells them back to the embassy and says, and basically this was planned. We find out right away this was planned, and this is crazy because Carrie planned this out, and I thought that was actually an amazing twist. I kind of was expecting it, but I kind of wasn't, because Carrie, really doesn't really give a shit about this kid and wants to make his life difficult. So they pull into the embassy basement parking lot, and Fara and Max are there. And Carrie introduces them to Redmond and explains the one guy hit her in the nose, and we get this really good conflict between Carrie and Fara in this episode. Fara does not really like what Carrie is doing, and I personally really like Fara's character. Fara was a character who they didn't do much with last season. They had her on season 3. They didn't do too much with her. They're really doing a lot with her this season, which I personally really do love. I love what they're doing with Fara's character. They're making her so much more interesting. They're making her such a big part of the show, and I love that about her character. So she explains to Fara that they put a tracking device in Aayan's passport, and Fara wonders if she'll take out the kid when they spot Haqquini, and Carrie tells her to stop calling him the boy, which he kind of is. As I said, he is a boy. And, Carrie basically doesn't have any sympathy for him at all. We found out right away she has no sympathy for him. I was wondering if she did, but it turns out she doesn't, because she thinks he's an adult who smuggles drugs to jihadists, and she says if she or Quinn have any issues with the boy, she can remind herself she wouldn't have to do any of this if she recruited him successfully like she was supposed to. And basically, Carrie tells her to go to the safe house, clean up, and contribute to the operation. Phil reminds her that she found Haqquini, and there would be, and I agree with what she's saying. I agree, because Carrie's basically telling her Farah's done nothing. She's basically saying to Farah, I've done everything, you've done nothing. That is complete bullshit, because Farah's done a lot of things for her. She had that stakeout with Quinn, she had that stakeout with Max, there was a lot of stuff she did for her. So Farah's reminding her how, look, she's found Queenie, there'd be no operation without her, and I agree with that, definitely, because Farah was the one that's kind of started the operation, and if it wasn't for her, there would be no operation. So I definitely like that. So Boyd then lurks in the lobby of the embassy, but it's not clear if he has heard any of what they were arguing about, and Carrie goes upstairs and Revan and Max show her the surveillance of Aayan at the bus terminal. And they watch him get on a bus to Karaki, and Carrie says that's the wrong direction, but then he talks to a guy which points him to another bus. And this is the right way, towards Gyoza, where his uncle has a training camp. And Carrie's relieved that it seems to be working, and he boards the bus and it departs. And Revan says it's a 6-hour bus ride and tells Carrie she can crash on the couch in the next room, and he promises to wake her if anything happens. She goes to lie down, and Fara looks at Ayan's photos, and he left behind at the safe house when he fled. And she dumps them into a plastic bag along with his jacket. And basically, she's trying to, and she has some other items. She looks at the busted outside of the window by the door, which this is going to create a lot of problems for Carrie, definitely. She just threw away everything that mattered to, Ayan, basically. And I pretty much feel like Farah definitely is against Carrie now. She is not going to help Carrie like Carrie wants her to. I think she wants to help Carrie, but at the same time, like, she's pissed at her, so I understand why Farrah did that, definitely. So he ducks back as she goes to put some cardboard into the window, and that's the last thing we see of Farrah. So definitely it's going to be really intense, and I thought that was definitely a very good way to end Farrah's storyline this episode, basically. So the bus is stopped, and everyone is told to take their bags and get off, and they are herded off by armed men. And Max wakes Carrie and says something is happening, and Ian gets off with the others. Some of the men search the luggage on the bus. It's really intense at this point because I'm like, oh my god, what's about to happen? So while others hear the passengers together, Carrie watches and curses. She sees that they're checking papers, and they down the line asking for passports. And Ian looks very nervous at this point. The men are asking him for him, and then he slaps him. And Carrie tells him to wait and says that he's resourceful. And he answers questions about his student visa, and the soldier asks why he's there instead of on the way. And he asks who he is and holds on the passport up to the light. And Ian gives his fake name, but the guy yanks him at a time, and Carrie tells Redmond to wait. Now, I thought this was interesting because Carrie is basically claiming that she does not care about this kid. I personally feel deep down she does, but she doesn't want to tell herself that because she's not over Brody's death. Not only that, but she doesn't really want to get too connected to the people that she's against. I feel like that's what's going on there. And I think that definitely is very interesting and makes Carrie a very interesting character. I mean, her character in this episode is definitely very interesting. I know a lot of people don't like Carrie and are saying her character's not as interesting anymore. I gotta say, her character definitely is more interesting because of everything that went on in this episode, definitely. So Ian, basically the soldier demands that he tell him the truth, and he hands over his money and says that it's all he has. The soldier snatches it and smiles, and he tells him happy holidays, tosses his passport back to him, and Carrie's smiling at this because, he was okay. So Remen is smug, and Ian picks his illegal papers off the ground, heads back onto the bus with the others, and then Farah hears, well, there actually was one more scene with Farah. Farah hears a security alarm beeping downstairs, puts in the code. She sees the bag of stuff having been rifled. She notices the cardboard in the window is ajar, and Hangsley comes to tell Quinn that Saul isn't in DC because, they were looking for him and he can't find him. So obviously they know something weird is going on with Saul. So Quinn tells him to get a number from Carrie, but the guy says she's holed up in Ops 1 and he can't get to her. So Quinn tells him to call Saul's wife Mira because, of course, maybe Mira would know where he is. Now, my only complaint is we haven't seen a lot of Mira this season. Like, I don't know what's really going on there. I guess they don't really want to show a lot of them because they're on good terms. I think that's what they're trying to show is that Saul and Mira really are on good terms. We don't really need to see much of them. We're not really seeing a lot of Mira, but I honestly don't care that we're not seeing a lot of her. So, it's a minor complaint, not really, but the bus then pulls up and Ian hops off first. He heads down a street. They watch some satellites and Carrie asks them to pull closer, and then they see he's at a payphone. And Max is on it, and she tells him to hurry. And Ian is talking to someone, and Carrie pushes on Max. They get it finally. They're running down the number as they listen, and he's talking to Haqquini. And Carrie asks what they said, and the translator says they are meeting where they did when he was a boy. And that's really crazy because Ian calls her, and this is definitely a very well done scene because basically Carrie has to pretend that she's in love with him. And just, it's an amazing scene to watch because I really felt bad for Ian in the scene, definitely. Basically, she says she has to scramble to close down the audio to avoid feedback. She says she was worried she wouldn't hear from him. She asks if she can talk to him, and she says she doesn't understand who's listening. She says she's okay, but they gave her 24 hours to leave the country. Ian says he thought on the long ride and says he thought just about her. And he says he saved him so many times, and he wants her to know that he loves her. And that was just crazy. Everyone's staring at her, and I was definitely very surprised by that. I mean, he is definitely getting way too connected to her. You can tell that right away. And she's basically realizing, oh shit, he's getting too connected to me. And he says he can't wait to see her. And she says she loves him too. And they end the call. So that is such a hard scene to watch because we know deep down she doesn't care at all about him. We know this. So it's really hard to watch that scene because it was just really well done. Definitely, Claire Danes did a great job in that scene. I thought she was amazing, and just the way that scene was done was so intense and so well done. Definitely. So she comes to sit by Redmond, who looks at her with a stance but says nothing. So Ayan heads out of the village, and through a rocky field, he goes to a small forest and heads into the trees. And Carrie watches on the satellite feed, and Redmond comes in and says Fara left her some garbage bags. And she asks Redmond what he thinks, and he asks about what he. She says everyone heard what the kid said to her, and Redmond sits and says he doesn't think she cares what anyone thinks. And she asks what if she does. He says they all thought Haqquini was dead, but he's not, and now they're about to get him for real. And she made that happen. He says that mostly what he thinks he leaves, and Ayan kneels in the foothills of some mountains and prays to Allah as the sun comes up. He stands and slips his shoes back on and continues his walk. It's definitely a very intense scene because, you don't exactly know what's going to happen to Ayan, definitely. He walks through the foothills and stays near a creek. Finally, he comes to an area where women are dripping water with buckets. He looks into the mountains and smiles, and Carrie's pouring coffee, goes back to watching his progress on the live satellite feed, and he pulls off his socks and pulls up his jeans, steps into the water, crosses to a couple of concrete structures left in the creek, and sits down. And he lies back to feel the sun. So Boyd is then at a cafe, and Taz Reem shows up, and she asks him if it's early for him. And he says he's turning over a new leaf. He says he got into Gary's apartment and shows her the photo of the drugs. And he says he thinks she's at least bipolar, which is true. Carrie is bipolar. Because, of course, we know that he was investigating something about Carrie in the last episode, and we find out what that is in this episode. Basically, he thinks that Carrie's at least bipolar and maybe worse. He's very suspicious about her. He doesn't really think that Carrie should be in this position, which, if you kind of think about it, she is not the best boss, really. I mean, even though she is the boss, she's not a good boss. I mean, she's bipolar, everyone's against her, Farrah's turning against her, like, definitely there's not good stuff there. So, I definitely think by the end of the season, Carrie's not going to be the boss. I think Boyd's personally going to take over, just because Boyd, like, definitely, I think, is jealous of Carrie. He's jealous of Carrie. He's starting to put together some clues about her, which is true that she is bipolar, so I definitely feel that Boyd might end up taking over. So he says the CIA safe house, and he says there was a big cleanup yesterday and shows her the photos. And she says it's Aayan, and he says maybe not anymore. Then shows her a travel dossier with a new name. And she tells Boyd he has a real gift for this. And she says she has to move on this. And Aayan then lies relaxed on the concrete. And then men with guns approach. And there are four of them. He stands and crosses the creek to them, puts his socks and shoes back on, and Carrie asks who these guys are. She's obviously very confused because she didn't know these guys are going to be here. She's very confused with what's going on, and they're looking around. And then Max runs facial recognition on them as they head to the waiting truck, and one is Azir Magdezi, and another is Bazir Kezem. And they are both Haqquini's guys. And Ayan doesn't actually appear nervous about these guys because he talked to Haqquini. He thinks everything's okay, and he just thinks they're going to have a conversation, basically. So they all stand and look around, and Max asks what they're doing, and Carrie says they're waiting and says Haqquini may be coming. They tell her they can't protect the asset if they drone them. She says if the target shows up, they take action. And then Quinn sees a note, and he's asking for Hensley all up and down the hall. The note said he never got on the plane. He says he just found a couple of hours ago, and he just found out a couple of hours ago, and Quinn's yelling because they now have new information about Saul. They realize that Saul did not get on that plane, and they know that definitely something is up and something bad is going on there. So Carrie asks what they're looking at, and we see a couple more trucks pull up. And Carrie says to sweep and get a positive ID. Aayan talks to a man who says he shouldn't have come. And Quinn comes in, tells her Saul never got on the plane. She says they're in the middle of this. He's telling her this, but she doesn't really care at this point. And they confirm it's Haqquini, and Redmond comes in. They're about to bomb them when they see a man dragged out of one of the trucks, and it's Saul. That was amazing right there because I knew Saul was captured by them. I did not know they were going to try to get Saul to work with them. I predicted that Saul was going to work with them. I did not predict that he was going to be there, though, because I thought Saul maybe wasn't going to be in this episode. So I thought that was amazing. I thought that was amazing that they had Saul in that scene. The reveal that Saul basically They think kind of Saul betrayed them. They don't realize that he was kidnapped, and I think this was amazing, definitely, and just such a good reveal. So, Haqquini tells Aayan that this man was the head of the CIA. He asks what the woman said to him, and says the woman is practically his child. And Haqquini says there's a drone overhead now, ready to kill them. Aayan looks up at the sky and into the camera of the drone. Haqquini says the medicine saved his life. He thanks his nephew and then kills Aayan. And I was so surprised this happened. Now, let me say this. Am I surprised that Aayan died? No, I knew he was gonna die. I mean, come on. They had the balls to kill off Brody. Okay, they had the balls to kill off Brody last season. I had no doubt in my mind that Aayan was not gonna die. I knew he was gonna die. I knew something bad was gonna happen to him. I did not think he was gonna die this early. Honestly, him dying this early though is better because it brings a lot more tension. Plus, we're halfway through the season, so it's gonna definitely get much more intense now. So Haqquini stares up at the drone, but knows they won't kill him because of Saul, and Carrie orders them to take the shot. Quinn says they can't. She's basically just going crazy. The more she's like, take the fucking shot. She's like, take the shot. Like, she's going crazy. Obviously, she's going very crazy, which in my opinion, I think she's going crazy for two reasons. One, she's bipolar. Two, she's not over Brody's death and does not want to get too attached to Aayan and was starting to get attached to Aayan. I think that's what's going on there. And, she was already very upset, very miserable, and this just made her even more miserable and she doesn't want to be. So she's ordering the shot, but Quinn says no, and Max hesitates, and Quinn grabs her and says that it's actually Saul that's there, and, basically tries to bring her back to reality and tells her she's out of her mind. And the vehicles roll out, and for now, both Saul and Haqquini are safe. They watch the trucks roll out, and Carrie storms out. She's obviously very upset. So at an intersection, each of the three vehicles roll in a different direction. They ask Quinn which vehicle the drone should follow. He's not sure, and Carrie paces in her office. She's trying to calm down, and she looks at the bags of stuff Farrell left and swipes her desk clear in a fit of rage. She's crying and shaking, and you definitely can tell this is going to affect her tremendously. Wow, what an amazing episode. I love this episode. Just so, so good. Now let's talk about a few things definitely. It looks like next week's episode is going to be mainly about what they're going to do with this Saul situation. Because in my opinion, they need to approach this in a way that isn't going to hurt Saul because, Saul was kidnapped. This was not his choice. I do feel that Saul's going to end up working with them because he doesn't really trust Carrie right now. Quinn doesn't trust Carrie. Fara doesn't trust Carrie. What's Fara going to do? There's definitely going to be a lot of tension between Carrie and Fara. I don't think Fara's going to help Carrie as much anymore. The Aayan plot's done, and in my opinion, I wasn't expecting it because I thought the season plot was going to be Carrie and Aayan. Carrie basically seducing Aayan and pretending that she was actually on his side when she really wasn't. But of course, again, this is a show that killed off the main character and one of the main characters in season 3. So I'm not surprised they kill off Aayan, and killing him off was probably the best thing they could do because now Carrie's in a terrible place, and it looks like next week Carrie's actually going to end up captured. So I don't know what's going to happen to Carrie. I'm definitely very, very worried about Carrie. I'm definitely worried about what's going to happen with her. Um, definitely we'll have to see what ends up happening there. Overall, guys, I love this episode. This was definitely the best episode of the season. My other thing is, do you think Boyd's going to take over? Because I don't think Boyd trusts Carrie. I think Boyd definitely does not trust Carrie. I think, like, he wants to, but he doesn't. Definitely he's going to like Fara. Quinn, I definitely think is also going to like Fara. Definitely it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Boyd, I think maybe he's going to be doing some bad care because he knows she is bipolar. Well, he doesn't know officially, but I think he is eventually going to find out what's going to happen there. But that's in my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys saw this episode. I can't wait for the next episode. I'm going to be honest, guys. Homeland was better than The Walking Dead this week. Okay, that rarely ever happens, but this really was better than The Walking Dead. It was much more intense. I was much more into it this week, and I just loved it. By far best episode of the season. Can't wait for the second half of the season. The promo they showed looked amazing, and I can't wait for next episode. So I will see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for The Affairs. I'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.